peeps, it's Anna here from Disrupt Tutoring, and as always, it's such a pleasure to join you. Today we're going to be looking at a grade 7 Natural Sciences Energy and Change question taken from the Herzia Middle School June 2016 exam paper. So let's dive straight in. The instruction at the top says, read the following text and answer the questions. And the narration in the box reads, it is summer, and in Kayla's town the children are mad about frozen ginger beer popsicles, a kind of ice cream. Kayla needs to drop the price to get children to come and buy her frozen ginger beer popsicles. In her backyard, Kayla has already been collecting cool drink bottles. Kayla fills 24 bottles to the brim with ginger beer and screws the lids on each bottle tightly. She places them in a big basin and puts this in a freezer. She is shocked the next morning when she sees that the bottles have burst and the lids are cracked. Kayla has a huge problem. She first tries to get her ginger beer. She is lucky because all the bottles are still in the basin. She leaves them in the sun and they melt. Kayla gets back all her ginger beer. Now Kayla does not know what volume of ginger beer she could pour into each bottle so that it will not burst when she freezes it. She takes 5 new bottles and, using the lid of one of the bottles, scoops ginger beer from the basin and adds it to the bottles. Kayla counts the number of scoops she puts in each bottle. When she is finished, all the bottles have different volumes of ginger beer in them, but none are completely filled. She numbers the bottles, tightens the lids, and leaves them in her freezer. Kayla is happy with what she sees the next morning. None of the bottles have burst. Kayla finally knew the volume of ginger beer that was needed to make a bottle of her homemade ginger beer. And the first part of the question reads, identify the scientific problem that Kayla encountered. Now, when you're answering questions based on text like this, it usually helps to read the passage at least twice so that you can get the full gist of the story and get the answers to the questions that might come. But we're just going to read it once over since we're doing this together, but that's just good to remember for next time. Okay, so 10.1, identify the scientific problem that Kayla encountered. Now, Kayla encountered the problem of expansion of liquids when they solidify. When a liquid freezes in a bottle, it takes up more space. And because the bottles are filled to the brim and the caps are tightly screwed on, the bottles burst because the liquids expanded so much that they made the bottles to explode or burst. Okay, so the problem is expansion of liquids when they solidify. Let's have a look at the next question. Write down the most important thing Kayla knew about melting. The most important thing that you knew was that heat causes ice to melt, and that's why she left her frozen ginger beer in the sun, because heat causes ice to melt. And then 10.3 asks us to use the particle model of matter to explain why the frozen ginger beer melted when Kayla placed it in the sun. The first thing we need to keep in mind is that solid atoms are packed very closely together and have a rigid shape. Liquid particles, on the other hand, also have small spaces between them but are not as rigidly packed as solid particles. Okay, we also need to remember that particles are always moving, and the more energy they have, the faster they move. So, keeping these 3 important points in mind, we can therefore conclude that the heat from the sun gave energy to the ice particles, causing them to move faster and weaken the forces between the particles. And because also there was more space to move about because the constraint of the juice bottle had been removed, the ice was able to melt into a liquid and fill up the basin that was there. So, using the particle model of matter to explain why the frozen ginger beer melted is we attribute that to the fact that particles are always moving, and the more energy they have, the faster they move. Okay, and that's why the solid ice turned back into liquid ginger beer when it was placed in the sun. Alrighty. Now for the final part of this question, the instruction reads, in the 2 boxes below, identify and draw simple diagrams, use circles to show the arrangement of the particles in the two phases of matter in which Kayla observed the ginger beer. Okay, so firstly we need to identify which phases she saw and to draw simple diagrams in the spaces below of the phase that you identify. So it's also, again, let's remind ourselves that matter exists in three phases: solid, liquid, and gas. And the first phase and one of the phases that Kayla identified was the solid phase. This is when the ginger beer turned into frozen beer or into ice. Okay, and the diagram, a simple diagram using circles we can use, is one like this, where you see you've got circles that are tightly packed together with small spaces in between each of them. Okay, and the tight packing gives a sort of definite shape to the solid phase of matter. And the second phase that you saw was the liquid phase. Okay, and we will use circles again. You see we still have small spaces in between, but they are not as rigidly packed as it was in the giving the definite shape of a solid particle. It's more irregular because these are sliding past each other and are able to move more freely because they don't have such a rigid shape, a rigid packing rather. Okay, the arrow is showing again the spaces in between. They're small but not as rigid as in the solid phase. Okay, so that's that on this subject. So but before I go, I'd just like to say thank you to our epic sponsor for making this video possible. Please read about them and more about us in the description. Also, don't forget to head over to our website for more of these epic tutorial videos. If you can't find the answer to your question, you can send us your question and we will respond with a personalized video just for you. Until the next time, guys, stay epic.